I have so many writers who will say to me, I mean, on that subject, it is an interesting thing because I think that intimidates writers because they feel like, oh my God, well, what if I haven't gone through massive pain in any way in my life? What do I draw from? And I said, pain can come in the moment.
Welcome to the latest episode of the Scriptcake podcast. This week, we are delighted to have Jen Grisanti. She is an acclaimed story and career consultant. She was a writing instructor for writers on the Verge for 13 years. She also worked for one of her heroes, Aaron Spelling, for 12 years. She also worked as a VP of current programming at CBS and Paramount. And she is the author of 3 books. Storyline, Finding Gold in Your Life Story, which we will discuss today. TV Writing Toolkit, How to Write a Script That Sells. And Change Your Story, Change Your Life, A Path to Your Success. Welcome to the podcast, Jen.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
We are excited to be here. I am actually holding up your book right now, Storyline, and recently had a chance to read it. And I got to tell you, I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I really did. I wanted to ask you a question that you've probably been asked before. Would it be fair to categorize this book as part storytelling, part psychology?
Yes, it would be. I think everyone who works in story has to know, understand, and feel psychology, because story is a huge part of coming from the psychological component of the writer, of the character, and of the person who is going to view the story. So yes, you could categorize it that way.
Yeah. One of the reasons I aligned to you on this is in my classes, I've had students tell me that my class is a lot cheaper than therapy. So that's one of the reasons I keep taking it over and over. So I totally agree with you. Where story comes from is from.
And I think many of my consulting clients will say the same thing. You're better than a therapist, or you're the fact that I get story and writing guidance on top of therapy. And it's all connected. It's all linked. It's all, understanding the life process, thinking about how we pull and draw from, and the emotional component of what we go through that informs what we write.
Where did you first get that kind of aha moment on that connection?
It is always evolving. Like, story is continuously evolving. When I think about when I was a studio executive in the mid 90s, when I think about how much story has evolved from then until now, where we are taking a much deeper dive into why characters do what they do. And to understand the why, we have to go into the wound. And there are many different ways to go into the wound. And for example, the most recent thing that I'm seeing that has had a major aha and evolves the way I teach story is what I came up with a story tool called the triangle of the wound. And with the triangle of the wound, what I started noticing that a lot of streaming shows were doing was they were looking at the childhood wound that we would see illustrated in the opening of a show with the flaw. So I began to connect the idea that the flaw is the story of the wound. So we wouldn't know what that childhood wound was in the opening. We would only see flawed behavior that creates anticipation. Then very often there's a trigger incident that happens before we enter the story. So you have the childhood wound, you have the trigger incident that happens before we enter the story, then your series trigger in television or streaming, or your inciting incident in film split open both wounds. And when you develop your character from an emotional level, then you're looking at the recognition, first of all, that the character didn't heal from the earlier wound. So the fact that they didn't heal is stopping them making them stuck in the present scenario when we enter the story as far as the dream. So in order to get to the dream, they need to utilize the present plot as a way to do the emotional work on the unhealed wound to get to the dream. So that is something that has been evolving a lot with what I teach, and that is through a continuous amount of aha moments when you're watching story and suddenly you're figuring out, why is this working at such a high level, and how can I pass that forward in story tools so that the writer knows how to mimic and bring that to their writing.
As soon as you started talking about that, for some reason, my brain went to Squid Game.
Yes.
And the opening
Yes.
scene of Squid Game,
Yep.
playing Squid Game as children.
Yes, exactly.
And that connects right into it. Can you give us another example of one of the streamers that does something that uses this?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I can give you an example of Triangle of the Wound from Mare of Easttown. So, and I actually watched two things this weekend that it was also interesting. Like, I am always just fascinated with what we see and feel as we understand story at a deeper level. In Mare of Easttown, what they did that was so brilliant. And I would say the story structure, have you seen Mare of Easttown? With Kate Winslet?
I actually live in Philadelphia.
Oh, okay.
So, and the series was directed by Craig Zobel, who I went to film school with.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Sad to say, I have not watched it.
Oh, you have to see it.
I will.
So the fascinating thing is, like, looking at what I just talked about. So when we enter Mare of Easttown, Mare is stuck. And the reason she's stuck is there is an earlier wound that didn't heal. And we won't know that wound as far as her childhood until like episode 7. We won't know the depth of that wound, but we will see it in her behavior. And we will learn that the trigger incident that happens before we enter the story had to do with her son. So when we enter the story, she's stuck. The series trigger and dilemma sequence goes into the chief saying, there's been a viral video on the fact that we haven't found any information on the missing woman from 1 year ago. I need you to find something. You need to recommit to this case. Meanwhile, there's a new perpetrator in the neighborhood. So you have both scenarios. You're looking at, why didn't Mare find out any answers for that previous case? And then in the personal story, you recognize that Mare has custody or is getting custody of her grandchild. So you wonder, where is the parent of her grandchild? That creates an internal mystery that is answered by the end of the pilot. We're like, where is Mare's child who parented Drew? And by the end of the episode, we learn that Kevin, Mare's child, is Drew's father, but we don't know where Kevin is, and we'll find that out at the top of episode 2. So Mare's Triangle has to do with an incident that happened with her father, and I don't want to give anything away for people who haven't seen it, but an incident that happened with her father that did not heal, that's linked to what happened to her son before we enter the story. And then Drew, so her father represents the past wound that didn't heal. What happened to her son represents the present emotional work that she needs to do in order to solve the case in the plot. She needs to start believing again. She needs to do the emotional work so that she can solve the crime. And then you have the new perpetrator, which escalates the stakes. And then Drew represents the future. So Drew represents where she went wrong and not healing the past, and then not being able to deal with her son in the way that she had hoped. Drew represents the future. So that gives you a sense of the triangle of the wound and how it creates empathy and rooting interest for a character, where we understand how the internal and personal story is going to parallel the professional story.
That is fascinating. One of the things that I love is about how deep you get into this, because um, one of the big issues I see with a lot of young screenwriters is they'll write an entire feature or a pilot for a show, and there's no depth, there's no point. It's just stuff happening for no reason. And you just gave a primary example how everything that happens beat by beat throughout every one of these shows and movies happens precisely because of that emotional wound.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I know there are writers who will say, oh my God, that's like a math equation. I can't do that. That's too complicated. And it's like, but that's what our lives are. Our lives are dealing with the past, being stuck in the present, and trying to understand how through doing the emotional work, we can get to the future goal. So I think if you can learn in your mind that even though it sounds technical, that technical linking brings back about emotional connection, which is everything you want for the story to work.
Yeah. I often tell my students that I like to think of a screenplay as like an Advil. It's coated on the outside with something entertaining or interesting, but inside is medicine. And,
Yes, I love that. That's beautiful.
I'm a proponent of the fact that art is medicine for the soul.
I agree. Could not agree more.
I think
could not agree more.
You basically said that 10 different ways throughout your book. And I'm like,
well,
right.
and I think that, all of us, I think the fascinating thing about story, I've been doing story for close to 30 years now. And I'm sure like you, what we all learn is like the deeper we get into it, the clearer it becomes. So this is not an overnight thing. Like you cannot teach a writer to write a script that is going to sell and hit it out of the ballpark overnight, because it is something that you have to do the emotional work in your life first. And then you have to understand how to draw from that emotional work in the stories that you tell. And that takes so much time. And I think with what you're saying with that quote that embodies it so beautifully is the recognition that everything happens for a reason. And there's a value in all of it when it comes to art and comes to accessibility of the artist to dig deep into their story.
Yeah, one of the things that I love about you is you don't just preach this. You actually take a lot of really deep personal stories and not only tell us those stories, but take those stories and evolve them into your own log lines. Can you talk about, was that difficult for you to do?
I'll quickly tell you a story. So at the beginning of my career as a studio executive, I went through a divorce that I talk about in Storyline, where it was a little public because it was an actor who had a moment of fame. And so my writers would come into a writer's meeting and they would ask me about something that was so personal. And so what I quickly began to recognize is that when I was just honest about it and talked about it, then they felt safe. And then they started revealing stuff about them. And then I'd say things like, have you ever written about that? And I'd say not in an autobiographical way, but in a way of drawing from that emotional truth. And through my pain in that moment, I suddenly connected with writers in a new way that got them to an outcome. So that led me to recognize when I was doing my own log lines for my life, an exercise that I created as an icebreaker. So that because where that exercise was birthed was when I had a big seminar where I asked people, what are some universal life moments that have happened in your life that you have had to get through? And, I had one writer get up and talk for like 20 minutes. So I quickly recognized that it's great as an icebreaker, but I needed to find a way to minimize it And so Logline for Your Life came out of that. And then I drawing from my creative executive, studio executive experience, recognize that if I dig deep into my logline for my life, then people will feel safe, and that will let them dig into their log lines for their life. And so that made me get over my fear of revealing. I mean, I certainly have people with storyline email me and say, oh my God, like you went so deep, you went there. And I felt like, oh my God, she knows what I feel. And oh my God, this and that. And I thought, it is fascinating to me of when we move beyond fear and when we recognize that when we go through pain in life, that there are probably millions of other people going through the same pain. And I feel like our journey in this lifetime is to figure out how to move past these pains and then pass forward our stories, like in the caveman days, so that other people understand when they go through something similar, what they can do, what they can draw from with what you did.
Yeah, one of the quotes that you have in the book, well, it's not, like I said, quoting you, is that pain is a rite of passage.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the way that is said, because
Yes.
we often look at pain as a positive thing. We just look at the negative part, and most people just push it away and bury it.
Yes.
But as you've stated, and I agree, is that's where all the good stuff is for writers.
It is where and I have so many writers who will say to me, I mean, on that subject, it is an interesting thing, because I think that intimidates writers, because they feel like, oh my God, well, what if I haven't gone through massive pain in any way in my life? What do I draw from? And I said, pain can come in the moment. Pain can come in being jealous of a sibling, being the first in the eye of the family. That pain can come from a momentary thing. Pain can come from jealousy over a friend of yours getting into college over you, and it can dig deep in a different way. So I think it is an understanding. And I think as we go through our own arc of life, that we recognize that what I came to recognize, which I go through in Change Your Story, Change Your Life, is the concept of we can fail forward. So recognizing that our failures, our pain, is there for a reason, and we have a choice in that pain. We either fall victim to the pain, or as in storyline, we become the active hero in our own story. And so I think that's a crossroads for every person in life to decide what is going to create their own character with the choice that they make in that moment. And then our protagonist is the exact same thing, where you are going to create the character of your protagonist by their choice that they make when they hit rock bottom in the series Trigger and Dilemma, as well as the all is lost moment. And what they choose to do from that moment is what the story is.
One of the things that's interesting about this book that I liked is you even tell us where to look to find those moments. And one of the notions that you have really stuck out to me was by going through old photo albums.
Mm-hmm.
That's freaking genius. One of the things that you wrote about your experience going back through photo albums is you could actually tell by the way you looked or your hairstyle or whatever, what you were dealing with emotionally. Can you expand on that?
Oh, yes. A part of that came from an interesting thing. So a part of that came from, I think, being emotionally honest with yourself. And I think when you go through trauma and you look back at pictures, suddenly those pictures that in the moment had a significance in the narrative that you made up versus the narrative that actually was going on. So I think I began to look back at pictures when things shifted, and I began to see a truth in the pictures that wasn't the narrative that I told myself in the moment. And so that was a large part of how I came up with the exercise where, people are so afraid, and it's like, yet our pictures tell us everything. And when we look at our pictures and we think of the story under the story, then that's where story lives. And that comes down to emotional truth and awareness of the narrative. Is the narrative of what you tell yourself about the picture the same as what the reality was of the moment?
Yeah, I know we always, look back at those pictures with nostalgia,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe at a surface level. But if you do take a minute to dig a little
Yes.
deeper and to see where you were, there's
Yeah,
just a treasure trove of information there.
there is. I think when we look at the moments of the picture, and when we think about how we draw from life, and when we watch stories. So always when I'm watching a series or film, if I tear up, or if I feel intense joy, or if I feel anger, if I feel any intense emotion, I write it down. And so I write it down and I record it, because I think, why am I feeling so emotional there? What did that trigger in me? And that's where I tell people that, you can have the smallest moment have the greatest meaning, and what you add to it. And I think simplicity is also a part of mining these moments, of looking at these moments as far as what will mean what in a story. And all of that comes to linking, all of that comes to symbolism, all of that comes to how is it a part of the greater whole. So no moment lacks meaning as far as what we can pass forward. It's just how we observe it and absorb it, and then understand how to tell about it in the story, how to utilize it.
Yeah, I think that when I'm mining, my history for stories, sometimes it's even shocked me
Right.
how something so simple and so small
Yeah,
can actually expand into an entire feature script or something like that.
exactly.
My wife and I went to an Indian restaurant and we ordered a drink, and the guy misheard her and brought the wrong drink.
Hmm.
I wrote an entire feature about that.
Oh, I totally believe it. See,
Yeah.
that's a great example. That's
Yeah.
a great example.
For days and weeks, it bothered me
Hmm.
about this drink, and it's a very specific drink. So I won't get into the details about the story. Otherwise,
Oh, I love that. That's great. That's fantastic.
but it bothered me so much that I was like, there's something
Yes.
deeper here. And it ended
Yeah.
up being this incredibly personal story
Right.
that just came out of getting the wrong drink.
Because it triggered something in your response.
It really
And
did.
that is great to look at that.
Yeah, one of the things that I'll tell my students, if you get to that point where just something's just eating away at you and bothering you and won't go away,
Hmm.
something deeper there. Dig.
Yeah,
That's where you dig.
I agree. I agree. I love that you tell them that.
One of the things that you mentioned in the book was your life picture.
Hmm.
And I love the way that you phrased that, because you said you noticed that you were beginning to use darker colors
Hmm.
when painting your life's picture. A, what does that mean? And
Yes.
and B, how can we be aware of such things?
Well, it's interesting because my next digital product that is part of my story therapy series that I was telling you about earlier before we came on, is going to be dealing with characters and character dynamics and shadow work. And the shadow work is the acceptance. When you look at something like a tool that I'm going to use in going into that shadow work, which is largely like triangle of the wound, is starting that, and it's evolving that more into looking at, are you familiar with the Enneagram?
No, I'm
in
not.
the idea of 9 numbers. So the Enneagram is something that a lot of companies use when they're hiring employees. They look at what number they are, and Enneagram is starting to be used in story as a way to, because the Enneagram is all about why people do what they do. And the ideology behind it is we're all one of 9 numbers. We will feel a core number the most. There is a vice and a virtue of that number. So there is a light side and there is a dark side. And so shadow work is in the life process, is I think as we move through our failures, rejections, successes, joys, and all that, I think we start to recognize that we don't have to shy away from when things take a turn. Instead, if we are in the moment and process the moment and get to the other side of the moment, then that's something that we're not going to continuously carry with us, that is going to be revealed in our flaws as a way to suppress it. So I think it's the idea of, when I started noticing in my own pictures of looking at, the narrative that my mom always told me from the time I was born is you were born with joy. Like you came into the world happy and smiling, and you trusted everyone, and you were so joyful. And that was a narrative that I lived with. And I think a part of me thought I always had to be in that state. And so when I wasn't in that state, then I recognized, well, through doing the emotional work and recognizing it's okay when you're not in that state, because there are things that are going to happen in life that you have to move through, and you are not always going to be the happiest person in the room. And if you can just embrace that is what is going to connect you to people, when you are honest with when things go darker, why they go darker.
And how do you mine that? How do you mine that and convert that into something that can become a TV show or a movie or, a project, book that you're able to add depth to your story?
I think the bottom line of looking at when the picture starts, when life gets more serious, which is we get older, life gets more serious, darker things happen. You go through divorce, you go through death, you go through loss of friendships, you go through major life shifts. And so I think the idea of looking at your life in a way that embraces the light in the same way as the dark. And I think until you go through those moments and do the emotional work in those moments to get back to the light, you can't fully appreciate them. And as a storyteller, your gold is in those moments, and your gold. And every time we're watching a season arc of a series, we're watching the emotional work that is being done from childhood in the present plot. So the sooner that you begin to recognize in your own life the embracing of the light and the dark as part of the arc of growth of what you're going through, the sooner you're going to be able to write characters with depth and really get what they are going through.
No, I couldn't agree more. One of the things that one of my producer friends and I would always say when we're watching a movie, I go, you know why this doesn't work? Or you know what's wrong with this movie? And the answer was always the same. I don't care about the characters.
Yes. And the reason you don't care is because you don't know why they want what they want.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly.
So it's all about the why. It's understanding why do they want what they want. That's where story lives. Story lives in that why. And so many stories don't work because the writers fail to explore the why in a way that the audience gets the whole strategy behind the arc of growth.
Mm-hmm. I think it's in that why that we connect to the characters and the audience, and that we root for them And in essence, we end up kind of rooting for ourselves.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. One of the things that I'll talk about when I'm teaching for students is to really dig deep within themselves and, find a personal story. And a lot of the pushback that I'll get is, well, if I dig that deep, who's going to relate to it?
Yeah.
And I'm like, the deeper you dig, the more universal it is.
Oh, it is. It is so deep. I mean, and I do think people have to move past fear to go there, and yet the simplistic thing is, like, I watched a movie this weekend called Paper Spiders that is on Amazon. That when I looked at the simplicity of the story points that made such a significant difference. We entered the story, we got a sense from the picture that the father was no longer in the picture. So we have a mother and a daughter. And so you have the void with the father. Then you're adding the dream where the daughter is at the age where she's going to go to college and she wants to get into USC because USC is where her father went. So there's an emotional connection with that. Then you add the obstacle, which is mental illness, and her mother who is going through paranoid delusion, and what the daughter has to do because of that, and the emotional work that needs to be done in the response to that shift. And so the simplistic thing was, you're looking at why the daughter wants what she wants as it was connected to the trigger event that happened before we entered the story with the loss of the father, and the connecting of her and the mother as a way to do the emotional work over that loss through the plot of the story. Made it work, made it work, and at a high level. So I think people get so entwined with, I'm afraid to do that, or do I need to go there? I hear writers all the time say, do I have to have a flawed character? Do I have to go into the wound? And it's like, do you want the audience to connect to your story? Then yes, you have to have a flawed character and you have to explore the wound.
Yeah, early in your book, you talk about the fear of digging into that and sharing it and exposing it, and what will my parents think, and what will my spouse think, and what will my friends and family and my village think. I can attest to the truth of that, because I know when I was a younger screenwriter, there was certain stuff I wanted to work on. It may have had a risque component or such a personal thing that, at the core of my being. And do I want to put that out for other people to stomp all over?
Exactly. Well, exactly, because that's exactly it. Like, it is a piece of you that you're sending out to the world. And what if it gets rejected? So that is what stops people. And I think as people begin to recognize more and more that when they release those deepest fears and when they explore them is when the magic happens and when connection happens. And so I think through people starting to do that, they get less afraid of that, and they start to see those moments as their value to connect with the audience.
There was a quote, and by the way, I love the quotes at the beginning of your chapters.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I worked hard on finding the right quote to symbolize what was going on, what I was exploring in the chapter. So thank you.
Yeah, and I relate to that because I have quotes at the beginning of the chapters of my book that's coming out.
Oh, great.
And I'm
Congrats.
so mad that you use so many good quotes. I want to steal them, but I won't.
Feel free. Feel free.
But I don't remember what the quote was, but one of them said something along the lines of, when you're writing a story, it's about digging up this entirely personal thing about yourself and then hiding it. So the audience has to kind of go through the layers to figure it out. And I say something when I'm teaching, which is, you're going to take this thing that's super personal, but no one wants to watch a movie about exactly what happened there, which I think you say exactly the same thing. You're going to cover that up with this, exterior that no one's going to even consciously be aware of it. but
Yes.
subconsciously they will connect to it throughout the story, and that will make them enjoy it even more.
Yes. Oh, it's all about the threading through. It's all about the seeding, and it's all about not giving too much at one time, because you are continuously wanting your audience to be dying to know what's going to happen next. And when you reveal too much too soon, then the audience knows too much.
Right.
So it is understanding how to arc the story out in a way that you piece together and you create a mystery that the audience is a part of figuring out the answer.
Yeah, I often get some pushback saying, well, I don't want to write a drama. And I'm like, I'm not telling you to write a drama. You can have an emotional story in a horror movie, in an action movie,
You can.
sports movie, in any movie that you want, any genre that you want to. And you can
Exactly.
disguise it however you want to. But without that emotional core, it's
Right.
hard. Yeah.
Yep. That's true.
One of the quotes that you use that really reinforces that thought for me is, the stronger the worst case scenario is, the higher the emotional stakes are. Can you talk about the worst case scenario a little bit?
Yes, that is probably one of the biggest areas that I give notes on in my one-on-one consults, is if I'm not feeling the internal and or external stakes, it's because I don't know what is the worst that can happen if the goal is not achieved. And if I don't know what the worst is that can happen, then I'm not feeling the stakes, and you lose the momentum of your story. And so that understanding the idea and setting up at the beginning what is the worst that can happen in an external way, and then escalating that with your act breaks, and then adding the internal stakes as a way to allow you to continue to escalate the internal and the external, is a way that you build your acts. And so the all is lost moment is pivotal. And the all is lost moment, I think it's also being aware of, in your all is lost moment, your central character is becoming conscious of the flaw. And in the resolution moment is the question of, are they going to acknowledge the flaw, which is going to inform the action that they take that leads to the achievement of the goal? Or are they going to deny the flaw and stay with the same behavior, which is more of an ending, a tragic ending versus a happy ending? And certainly in streaming and in television, the goal is always achieved in the A story. So you're literally and the flaw is ongoing in streaming and television. So it's like the character becomes cognizant of the flaw, but they don't heal the flaw. They become cognizant, and that informs the choice they make that leads to the achievement of the goal.
What's interesting is you also say that the goal doesn't need to be achieved.
The goal in drama always needs to be achieved.
In chapter 21, you said the key is showing the change in your character as a result of the journey, that the goal
Right.
to be achieved. I'm confused then. What does that mean?
Okay, no, that's good that you asked that. In film, the goal doesn't always need to be achieved, and you can have a tragic ending. In television is what I'm saying. The A story in television, the goal always does need to be achieved. Now, once in a blue moon, for people who are going into non-traditional, you might have someone that successfully doesn't have that moment. But typically you're looking at, if the external goal, if you don't have a triumph moment where the external goal is achieved, then you do have a triumph moment where the internal goal is achieved. But the pilot goal is always achieved in a drama, in television, and most often in streaming as well. In film, you can have a film in tragedy where the goal isn't achieved.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, that is correct in film.
Okay, that's a good distinction to make. So
Yeah.
I actually understand that a little bit better. Now, in addition to all of this psychological components of storytelling, you also give some nuts and bolts kind of information in your book. For example, you talk about the importance of a log line and how that informs basically the entire journey. And
right.
Yeah. A lot of people write their log lines after they write the book or write.
Right.
You tell us to write it beforehand. Why is that?
I feel like the log line is your framework. And if your log line doesn't work, your story doesn't work. So I come from, now I know many people who revise their log line after the story speaks to them. And I think that's fine. But I think when you start with the log line, and my log line formula is setup of who, create empathy, dilemma, action, goal, twist of irony. So when you have those components in your log line, then it's telling you what your story is. And so you can see if the story is working or not working. And I think the mistake writers make is they think, oh, I'll just figure it out when I go to the page. But then when they go to the page, then they write a whole story where it isn't working. And that could have been prevented if they had worked out the details in the log line before they went and wrote the whole story.
Yeah, I find that when screenwriters don't take the time to dig out this emotional information, they go ahead and just start writing their screenplays. They generally run out of steam about 15 or 20 pages in.
Yes,
There's
very true.
There's no actual story they're writing. There's just stuff.
Yeah, there's no story. There isn't an arc of growth that is going on where we can feel it.
In addition to getting all this wonderful information out of your books and out of your
Right.
websites and out of your articles and out of all the things that you do, you also work as a consultant. Can you tell me a little bit
Yes.
about that?
I started my own business in January of 2008, at the same time that I started as the writing instructor for writers on the Verge. And my business is one-on-one consulting. And I recently hit a milestone where the 100th pilot was sold from writers that I've worked with since 2008.
It's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was very, very excited for this writer. When he told me, I was very excited. He actually sold 2 pilots. And so it made him my 100th. And he was a writer that I started working with early on when I opened my business. So my one-on-one consulting has to do with, writers contact me. Right now I'm booking 3.5 to 4 months out. And they contact me, they let me know what they're looking for. They go to my website, jengrisanti.com, and they can get an idea of my coaching and my services. And then I also have digital products where once a year, I have an event that has a live component that is everything I taught in Writers on the Verge that's in a course. So every year I choose a different angle of story that I explore, and I choose, coming from a current programming executive background, I choose what are the best shows at that point that exemplify what I'm trying to teach. And I teach for 6 weeks. So there's a live component. Then there's a digital product component, which is all my story instruction in digital products. So again, I think it's the recognition that the outcomes that I've had that have been the strongest with writers, either staffing or selling their scripts, is a combination of the story instruction mixed with the one-on-one consults, mixed with the teleseminar where they get exposed to working writers and get an opportunity to pitch.
That's a lot.
Yes, it is.
It's like a whole
It is,
world.
but it's what I've done for 13 years. So I think you're an author, then you're applying what you're teaching through your consulting, and then you're speaking. So I think it is the recognition that when you're an entrepreneur and you're creating something, that you're looking at several different levels where the message comes through.
Okay. What do you find is the biggest area in need for writers when they're coming to you for consults? What is the biggest thing that's lacking to keep them from, getting to be the 101th and 102nd and so on and so forth?
Well, I think that all of us, when we look at our flaws, we get in our own way. So I think that there are many writers that are incredibly talented writers who lack belief. And if they lack belief, then they get in their own way of getting to the outcome. So I think a large part of what I do with my one-on-one consults is the personal component in addition to the story structure. And like, I read scripts 3 times for every consult, and I give extensive notes as if you were getting notes from a studio executive. And so it is knowing that you're looking at the personal component and what has happened in their life. Are they exploring it on the page, or are they getting in their own way by avoiding things that could lead them to a sale? And then you're also looking at what are they doing in their life. Many people will say they're a writer, but they don't write a lot. So it's like you're looking at what are the value of the coaching consults is the accountability factor, because writers know that they have a deadline. And certainly in television and streaming, the deadline is more important than anything else. So I think that writers who prevent themselves from being number 101 are just writers who are still doing the emotional work to understand what they need to do and what the emotional work that they need to do to get to the dream, as well as learning, as well as the recognition that there's nothing easy about writing a show that's going to sell. There is nothing easy about this process. There are executive producers. There are many executive producers who have staffed on shows their entire careers who have never written a pilot that sells. So there is just the recognition that everything has to come together with the concept and the market and the emotional truth that leads to the outcome.
Yeah, it's a lot that has to work. I always, even when I watch a horrible show or a movie, I raise my hand and I toast and I'm like, God bless you, you got it made.
Yep.
Oftentimes students will just kind of raise their nose because they don't know what it takes to get the process.
So, as they say, when writing, what is it? You're bleeding on the page. I mean, that's what it is. And to understand how to do it correctly is a lifelong process, and how to continually do it correctly. You can have someone who has a massive hit, but I tell writers, every time you're writing a new TV pilot or a new film, or, you have to recognize you're starting from scratch again. So you have to be open and be flexible and move through it to get to the outcome. I rarely ever see writers where it's like, all right, now I got it and everything's figured out and I'm going to hit home run after home run after home run. It just doesn't work like that.
You're right. I mean, how many writers are there out there that you can see that have just kind of, I just recently watched Out of Sight again, the Soderbergh movie. And I didn't realize Scott Frank wrote it, because Scott is so.
Yes. So I'm a fan. Yes.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, Scott wrote that? I mean, it's an adaptation, of an Elmore Leonard novel, but Scott adapted it. And I was just kind of like, wow, I didn't realize that, because I'm appreciative of the work he's done over the last 10, 15 years.
I agree.
20 or 30 years ago, he was still doing that kind of thing.
Oh, that's fascinating. I love that you did that. Yeah, he's a great writer.
So if someone's looking to get you to consult with them,
right,
what stage do they need to be? Have they, is it
any stage? I work with writers. I mean, because I staff 15 primetime shows, I work with a lot of working writers. So I work with writers who have staffed before, all the way up to co-executive, executive producer level. However, I also work with writers who are very hungry, coming out of college or grad school, and are ready to hit the ground running and want to create a writing portfolio and understand how to do that. So, and I have writers, because like in Writers on the Verge, our whole point was choosing the top writers who are on the verge of working. And we would get like 3,000 submissions a year and choose, that the NBC would go through and choose the top tier from those applicants, and then we'd have them write a pilot in 5 weeks. So I work a lot with writers at starting with the concept, where either they can pitch me 3 to 5 concepts and we start there and we figure out what is the most viable in the market. Then we move to the outline. Then we move to 3 drafts of the script, because I have a package. The 5 coaching consult package is probably my most popular package, because you're starting with the seed of the idea and you're moving through the script. Or I can have writers who want that same type of package, but want to work on 2 different scripts. So we work on 2 different scripts. So writers can contact me at any level in the creative process. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. And they can reach you at jengrisanti.com.
Yes,
Yes.
they can. My website has everything on it.
Grisanti, and I will put a link to your website in the.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
So Jen, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I loved your book. Really couldn't agree more with the approach that you're taking. And
oh, I love it. Thank you so much. And I love your questions. Your questions were great. Thank you for reading it and aligning with it. It sounds like everything you're doing is in direct alignment with how we see story, how the similarities. So I appreciate it.
It's funny. A few years ago, I was in a group meeting with a bunch of screenwriters who were going to take a group and make it a nonprofit and do all that. And of the people in the group, it was myself and another gentleman who had actually sold scripts. Nobody else
Right.
at that point. And it got to the point, the further we talked in the conversation as a group, the more he and I were finishing each other's sentences.
Yes,
I think the more time you spend and the more experience,
I agree.
all of a
I
sudden
agree.
it starts to come to a point where,
You're like kindred spirits that
Yeah.
see story. Yep. I agree.
absolutely. And I'm starting to feel that way with a lot of people that I'm interviewing for our Scriptcake podcast. So
That is fantastic.
it's good to know that's how it works. Okay. Once again, Jen Grisanti, the book is called Storyline: Finding Gold in Your Life Story. She also has 2 other books, TV Writing Toolkit, How to Write Script That Sells, and Change Your Story, Change Your Life, A Path to Your Success. And once again, jengrisanti.com. Link will be below. Thank you. What a pleasure it was to talk to you.
Thank you.
All righty. Until next time.
All right.
Thank you so much for watching this video, and as a small token of my appreciation, I want to offer you a free video course on how to outline your screenplay. I normally charge $299 for this course, but for a limited time, it is free. Now, it is a 5-day course, but I'm giving you 7 days to finish this outline, okay? After 7 days, that course goes away. So if you're not dedicated and you don't want to knock out a killer outline for your screenplay, don't do it. But if you do, click the link below. I can't wait to hear how you like it.